segregation in school education. I reminded him that he was very much himself a product of a highly selective as well as a pretty privileged education, Hyder School at Oxford, and at this point he replied,
"Divisive, unjust and wasteful. Yes, I still think that a selective system of education is divisive, unjust and wasteful. I think that as strongly as I did 20 years ago. The only caveat that I would have now is I then said that it was the most divisive, etc., element in the whole of our society. I'm not sure that I would take that view quite so strongly now, because there has been a lot of American research which suggests that we were inclined 20 years ago to exaggerate the effect of education taken alone on people's life chances and so on. So whether I would now use the words the most, but subject to that, I still think that a selective educational system at the secondary school level is intolerable.
And you think that the school system we still have is divisive, unjust and wasteful?
Ah, well, we've moved a long way towards a more comprehensive system still then, so it's much less unjust, divisive and wasteful than it was when I wrote that.
And now let's look at comprehensive education. Are you still yourself convinced that that is the right line, the right answer?
Yes, I am convinced, yes. I mean, I think there are difficulties about the way that it's worked out in many parts of the country, but I have no doubts. I'm a convinced pro-comprehensive person as much as I was then.
And do you think that that form of education should really, in order to eradicate the divisive, unjust and wasteful elements, should be made therefore compulsory? Absolutely.
I think in the long run this must happen. I think this is for the long run rather than for the short run. But I certainly look forward to a system such as the Scandinavian countries have, and indeed such as Germany very nearly has, when the notion that there is some tiny, separate, privileged sector of education is unimaginable. Well, and if you take the Scandinavian countries, after all, there's about one private school in each of them. Who goes there? The children of diplomats who are serving abroad and have special problems. Otherwise, it's a few backward children of very rich people, but they play no part in the whole society in the way that our selective schools do here.
Now, let's just look a bit closer, perhaps, at the comprehensive education itself. One of the difficulties in my mind, at any rate, is that it really requires, in order to work, extremely large schools. Or don't you think that is necessarily so?
Opinion has moved quite a lot on this. I mean, if that were the case, I would agree with you in having doubts. I think that these large schools, our two children went to the largest comprehensive school in the country, I think,
right.
2,000 pupils. I have grave doubts about schools of that size.
That school was Holland Park?
Yes, a school very wrongly described in the press always. In fact, well, much criticised in private by a number of parents. I'm still extremely glad they went to a comprehensive school.
You have no, interrupting there, you have no regret that your two stepchildren went
none at all, and nor do they. I mean, on balance, taking not only the education, but taking the whole experience of going to a quite different sort of school at the age of 18 or whatever, when they each came out, I am absolutely clear that they were better equipped for life, to use a rather corny phrase, than two girls who come out of, I don't know, Rodin or Cheltenham Ladies' College or something.
Well, that might have been happening because they've been living with you and your wife, of course, Susan.
No, I think the effect of the school was good. But on the size point, which is terribly important, I think these schools of 2,000 are too large. I have no doubts about this. One of the very encouraging trends in the last 3 or 4 years has been the increasing agreement, partly due to the fact that far more people are staying on in sixth form than anybody expected. The increasing agreement that you can run a successful comprehensive of a size very, very much less than 2,000. The argument for the huge school always was that unless you had a huge school, you wouldn't be able to build up a large enough sixth form. And we've now found from experience that you can build up a perfectly satisfactory size sixth form with a school far, far smaller than 6,000.
Well, like what? Like about 1,200 or 1,400. Still pretty big.
Oh, well, they're coming down. There are a lot of successful comprehensives with 800 or 900.
With a decent-sized sixth form?
With a decent-sized sixth form, yes.
But presumably those particular comprehensives are, in fact, putting it cruelly, in middle-class areas, drawing a sort of rather elitist class of children, I suppose.
Well, it may be, although the number of middle-class children going to comprehensives is still comparatively small. I mean, it's a very small proportion of the middle class.
Yes, but if they saw a good sixth form building up, they might then say, all right, let's go there, let's send our kids there.
Yes, no, I think that might happen. I think that is part of the reason. But generally, what one might consider the optimum size, if you like, of a comprehensive school is tending to come down quite dramatically.
I mean, do you at all bothered about the fact that discipline in schools is becoming, in certain areas, a great problem, perhaps because of size to some extent? Also, of course, because of the raising of the school leaving age.
partly because of the raising the school leaving age, we always knew that this would present this particular problem. It is not an unexpected one. I think, though, that it's not mainly the result of size, the difficulty of discipline in schools. I think it's mainly a function of much wider influences, not all of which one understands in the slightest degree. I think that this is partly a reflection of what's happening in other aspects of our social life as well.
Now, what you're saying, and indeed what also Reg Prentice, as Minister of Education at the moment, has been saying, is that he wants to do with selection altogether, get rid of selection completely. Now, I don't myself see how you can do away with selection, save possibly at the cost of destroying the universities. And indeed, there have been noises coming out of the universities since Reg Prentice's remark to this effect. Now, how do you think you can do away with selection? You can't do away with selection at university level, can you?
I haven't seen the exact text of what Reg Prentice said, so I'm not clear what he had in mind. I am strongly against any selection at the secondary school age level. When it comes to higher education, yes, there's bound to be selection then, as long as higher education only includes 6, 7, 8% of the total population. That 6, 7 or 8% somehow or other has got to be selected. And that applies not just to the universities, it applies to the polytechnics as well, and colleges of education and so on.
If I may now revert to something you wrote, and indeed you mentioned in passing, back in 1956, you said, quite in passing, no doubt the proportion of high IQ children is greater among the middle class than among the working class. You said that then, you mentioned a rather similar remark here. One of the odd things, it seems to be a very sensible remark, but in a way, you can't always get away with that kind of remark now, can you? You couldn't have said, no doubt the high proportion of IQ children is greater among the whites and among the blacks. And it's the same sort of remark.
I don't know whether you could say it now.
People have tried saying it and have got into frightful trouble.
Yes, they have, but I think that people like Isaac and others, have been saying something a good deal more provocative than that. What I said there is simply, I think, has probably never been denied, because it doesn't even rest on the sort of theory that Isaac is putting forward, that intelligence is a totally inherited matter. Even if intelligence wasn't inherited to the slightest extent, clearly the children of middle-class parents have a background that's much more favourable to, in terms of books around the house, in terms of a whole lot of environmental advantages, so that whether IQ is inherited or whether IQ is a factor of family background...
It's obviously a bit of both.
It's a bit of both.
The question is how much of what and how much of the other, isn't
I don't think anybody knows.
Can I just revert to the selection problem? Because I think, all right, let's assume, for the sake of argument, the comprehensive conclusion, let's say everybody ought to go into these comprehensive schools. You're still going to have to stream in the schools, aren't you? You're going to have streams, or don't you think that? Do you think that comprehension should destroy streaming within schools?
I think that streaming should steadily weaken in schools, and indeed this is happening now. A large number of schools certainly don't stream for the first 2 years, for instance. If we take the Swedish example, as I understand the position in the Swedish comprehensive streaming has virtually disappeared altogether. And I'm sure that's the direction in which we shall move.
Well, do you think there's any danger here of penalising the clever ones?
I don't think so, because I think the clever ones, I've long been convinced of this, that really clever children are going to stay clever and get ahead and educate themselves or be educated almost regardless of the kind of school they go to, or almost regardless of the organisation of the school. But
part of the justification, of course, of comprehensive schools is that the clever children educate the others.
Yes, I think that they do have an effect on the school. But as far as the clever children themselves are concerned, I think they're the least of the worries, the least of the problems.
It doesn't occur to you at all in reflecting that the whole question of comprehension may have been wrong. This is not a thing that bothers you. You don't think that you got that one wrong at all.
Well, I don't, but then getting it wrong, of course, is partly a matter of one's basic value judgment.
You see, well, there are certain evidence that literacy and illiteracy and subliteracy are increasing.
Yes, but I don't think this is generally put down to the fact of comprehensive schools. I'm afraid I've been out of the educational world too long to be able to answer that at all clearly as to why it's increasing. Or why or if it's increasing.
You don't, in fact, think that at any rate, in the pure general terms, that there's any danger whatever of debauching the educational system because of an unproved dogma which has to do with comprehensiveness in education and equality in general?
No, I don't, because for 90% of the population, the system has been horribly debauched ever since they've known it. After all, for this huge majority of the population, they've never had the advantages of grammar school or public school or small classes or highly educated sixth form people, whatever and whatever. All they've known is wretched, run-down secondary moderns. getting the worst of the staff and the worst of the pupils. So they've never had a non-debauched education at all. And I think comparing a generally comprehensive setup with a setup which in practice was bound to be dominated by a whole lot of secondary modern schools, that the first is much superior to the second.
Well, we'll leave education in a minute, but there's just one thing. You've quoted approvingly in the past Tawney's words that the first need now is to treat sanctified formula with judicious irreverence and to start by deciding what precisely is the end in view. Now, is the precise end you have in view of education to make a contribution towards equality or to produce the best possibly educated children?
I think it's a mixture of the two.
Well, I thought you'd probably say that, but...
And I think that's right. I think that makes sense.
You want a bit of equality and a bit of best possible. I don't think you can have the two.
Well, I don't see why we shouldn't have the two. I don't think you can go simply for... It's not just the best education. The trouble with the non-comprehensive system is that it gives the best education to a relatively small proportion of the population who are the ones who get selected for the superior schools. So one's not...
And they're, of course, the ones who end up running the show, by and large.
Yes, that's also true.
And the show needs to be well run.
Well, I don't think there's any evidence that children coming from comprehensives, I mean, after all, increasing numbers of them are going to university now and are going to polytechnics. I don't think they're any worse educated than their predecessors who came from grammar schools. But when one's talking about the quality of education, the tendency is always simply to talk about the quality of the 10 or 20% grammar school come public school stream. I don't think the quality of their education will suffer. In any case, as I said earlier, I think the bright children get on anyway. But if you take the bulk of the 80%, there's no question of the quality of their education worsening as a result of going comprehensive. It'll get better, not worse.
And incidentally, in talking about getting rid of sanctified formulae, you've been pretty good in the past at doing this. Do you reckon you're still as keen as you once were, and as Tawney always was, on getting rid of sanctified formulae of one sort or another, not necessarily educational? Or do you think perhaps power tends to corrupt everybody, you included?
I think that's something you'd have to answer, not me. Without my psychologist present, not all that.
Have you got a psychologist?
But just on Tawney, from
Yes.
Tawney was talking about formulae, not principles. Tawney would never have regarded the case against selection in secondary education. He would never have regarded that as a formula. That would have been to him an absolutely basic principle.